The purpose of this presentation is to summarize, reiterate, and connect the idea of flesh machine as we've explored it this semester. We began this semester asking what flesh machine means, and at this point we should all have at least 3 conceptions of what the phrase can entail. The first includes treating plants, animals, and humans as equally mechanistic. Some examples that come to mind for this include Samuel Butler's idea that humans and machines are all on the same spectrum with varying degrees of complexity. Another example is H.G. Wells's vivisectionist fiction that suggests bodies are just as malleable and manipulatable as machines. The second way we've used the phrase flesh machine this semester is as a metaphor to explore the relationship between the sciences and humanities. Take these images for instance. Would you consider them art or science? I hope that by now one conclusion we can safely consider as a result of this class is that extreme answers often fail to fairly comprehend the problem, idea, and situation at hand. We learned from James's Turn of the Screw that our best chance at coming to reasonable conclusions is to bring together the multiple perspectives from within the novella, to take into consideration, for instance, not just the governess's limited perspective, but to also ask ourselves, what is Mrs. Gross's, Flora's, Miles, the uncle's, Douglas's, and the unnamed narrator's perspectives? We practice this multiplicitous approach in our own discussion forums as well, as we negotiate between multiple perspectives and accept multiple, sometimes contradictory yet always simultaneous interpretations. In much the same way, when we are presented with a question in our academic and professional areas, we should be considering multiple perspectives and multiple interpretations. Here, each of these images can be seen as both art and science. They are each beautiful and awe-inspiring in their color, enormity, meaning, complexity, uniformity, thought, and strangeness, just as they are also subjects and expressions of scientific inquiry. Take, for example, the Carina Nebula, an image taken by the Hubble celebrating its 20th anniversary. The image is not just an example of the sublime, striking feelings in potentially contradictory ways, from awe and tranquility to sadness and fear. It is also a history. For some it represents part of a cosmic history with fantastic elements. It's a craggy mountain of chaotic gas and dust being eaten away by the brilliant light of nearby bright stars and burrowed out from within by infant stars, some of the youngest known clusters in our universe, that announce their presence with jets of gas bursting outward and streaming from the towering peaks. It is a dust column of scorching radiation and fast winds, 3 light-years tall. It is bigger and brighter than the famous Orion Nebula, but difficult to locate given its place in the southern sky. The Mystic Mountain is an expression of cosmic history, but it is also an expression of cultural history. The Mystic Mountain, as an image, is often compared to NASA's 1995 Hubble images of the Pillars of Creation, another landmark image. The Pillars of Creation was famously composed by bringing together 32 different images from 4 separate cameras. More to the point, the difference in color between the two marks just how far our instruments have come in discerning the creative and destructive forces of the cosmos, the colors being essential to giving us information about cosmic processes. But far from ruining the poetry of the universe by providing us with further knowledge, it rather seems poetic that such grandeur is made comprehensible to us through such a simple thing as the colors of a spectrum. Such discoveries and inspirations of today recall the same feelings of wonder and awe many had for science in the 19th century. Remember, for instance, John Keats's wonder for Newton's optics, or John Constable's meteorological paintings. Finally, the third way we've used the phrase flesh machine is to examine the living machine. Frankenstein's monster is a perfect example of an early living machine. Like a machine, the monster was originally intended as a tool for Frankenstein's scientific inquiries. Like a machine, he was made of several component parts that melded together to create a working tool. And like a machine, he was created out of non-living matter. But another prominent example of a living machine is the train, another monstrous creation of mankind that threatened to disrupt human life with its inhuman strength, value, and coldness. We see these tropes apparent today, for instance, in movies. Here, on the right-hand side, is an image from a mid-19th century novel depicting trains in a monstrous manner, reflecting on their cold, industrial, and capitalist purposes and effects. On the left, we have a poster for Snowpiercer, a 2013 sci-fi film that, based on a 1980s French novel, uses the train to posture as a vehicle of eternal human progress, while also representing and facilitating some of the most brutal and regressive behaviors of humankind. To bring our discussion full circle, I want to remind us that these attitudes were wrought not just with anxiety, but with wonder as well. The 19th century saw the first World's Fair exhibition, called the Great Exhibition of 1851. Set in Hyde Park, London, this exhibition showcased demonstrations of both culture and industry from all around the world. Notables from Charles Darwin to Queen Victoria attended, and beyond them, 6 million people of all stripes came and investigated. What they saw was nations from all over the globe displaying their best in industry, technology, and design. The building which housed the show, dubbed the Crystal Palace, was considered an engineering marvel in and of itself. Made almost entirely of glass and iron, and taller than even the trees. In fact, it had to be taller than the trees because it was built arching over 2 trees that were already growing on the site. When it rained, the building glittered, impressing all those who saw it. The idea for the Great Exhibition had been drummed up by Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert. Britain was in a time of peace and experiencing a manufacturing boom. It was, simply put, the time to show off. Inside the Crystal Palace, visitors wondered at the assortment of 100,000 artifacts and inventions contributed by over 15,000 participants and displayed over a space of 10 miles. The biggest of all was a massive hydraulic press with tubes that weighed over 1,000 tons each, yet the wonder was that it only required a single man to operate. There were adding machines that could put bank clerks out of work, umbrellas with sharp tips for defense, stained glass, colored carpets, a Sheffield sportsman's knife with 80 blades, a printing press popping out 5,000 copies per hour of the Illustrated London News, folding pianos, French tapestries, porcelains, and silks, backed by the textile machines that made them, tangible ink for the blind, trophy furs, a 105.6-carat diamond taken from India, Russian vases, urns, sledges, and armor, the infamous Colt firearms, stuffed exotic animals including elephants from India and eagles from America, a gallery of carriages and motor cars, agricultural machines, a fire engine from Canada, a single impressive lump of gold from Chile, an array of gold watches from Switzerland, a set of stuffed kittens taking tea sent from Germany, and examples of every kind of steam engine fathomable, including the railway locomotive. It certainly was an awe-inspiring event. The question I want to pose now, then, is how far have we come in this dialogue of 2 cultures? What is a culture? We are so used to thinking how cultures can be relegated to geographical locations or ethnicities that we can often forget that culture comes from behaviors and expectations as well. A culture is, after all that cultivates a society. The sciences and humanities do this, and they do so, many would argue, in different ways, but therein lies the problem. At the beginning of the semester, we discussed the history of the arts and sciences, starting with their nebulous and fraternal roots in Greek philosophy, and the intimate 19th century debates over education, and then moved on to C.P. Snow's bungled argument in 1959 that claimed that the sciences and humanities are 2 separate and stubbornly irredeemable cultures. Now, in the 21st century, we are faced with choices. We can choose, for instance, to reinforce a centuries-long idea that the sciences and humanities are doomed to suffer from incompatibility, or, as C.P. Snow called it, quote, a gulf of mutual incomprehension, sometimes particularly among the young, hostility and dislike, but most of all, lack of understanding, end quote. If we do not remain with the idea of 2 cultures, we might choose to move on to a 3rd culture, which is marked by the movement of scientists into traditionally humanities and social science fields, including psychology, economics, geography, history, and political science. Or we can strive to develop 1 culture. STEAM, or STEAM, is this kind of 1 culture. STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. It is a marriage of the STEM disciplines and the humanities, and it is an effort to bring the sciences and humanities together in interdisciplinary research and planning. It does not ignore their differences. Instead, it strives to bring the two together like two puzzle pieces, such that the best of both cultures are recognized and used. Like actual steam, that is the evaporated water kind of steam, the STEM and humanities disciplines are imagined as so many individual particles that can come together in so many different ways. Which brings us to the final segment of this semester, steampunk and cyberpunk. Steampunk is not an offshoot of STEAM studies, but it is an example of a subculture that recreationally strives to bring science and art together. The most straightforward definition of steampunk is that it is a subculture and art movement inspired by the steam-powered technology of the 19th century. In steampunk art, we often see trains or airships as two conspicuous examples of steam technology. This definition is not always correct, though, for although it seems counterintuitive, the core of steampunk is not defined solely by steam power-inspired technology, fashion, or art. In steampunk fiction, for instance, we might see elements of fantasy and very little actual steam power. Steampunk often reimagines history and alternate worlds, and thus incorporates much of what we imagine when we think of an industrial and scientifically advancing Victorian culture. For instance, in any given work of steampunk, we might see flying or driving goggles, bone-crunching corsets, top hats, waistcoats, parasols, and mechanical trickery, trinkets, clocks, guns, and gadgets. But the same work of steampunk may also exhibit very little, if any, steam power. The core of steampunk, then, is also anchored in a persisting reliance upon the rebellious, that is, its punk nature. In brief, steampunk is ironically a reaction against mass production. Unlike the Victorians who were key to galvanizing mass production, steampunk artists emphasize the importance of putting things together with their own hands. But what is special about this is that in the end, steampunk is about making an art out of technology, and in this way, it strives to create a sometimes functional but always aesthetically pleasing culture of technology. Cyberpunk is another subculture that brings the sciences and humanities together, but whereas steampunk takes inspiration from past technologies, cyberpunk takes inspiration in future technologies. Like steampunk, cyberpunk culture hinges greatly upon punk nature, that is, kids, freaks, social pariahs, misfits, and technophiles that are seen as hooligans of the technical world, people who rebel with technology in tow. In fact, a main principle of cyberpunk involves the rebellious assumption that technology is in the wrong hands, and that all information should be free and decentralized. And this connects directly with the flesh machine concept that we've been discussing this semester, that is, that humans are nothing but machines. Let me elaborate. Recall for a moment our brief review of cybernetics early this semester. Cybernetics is the study of communication in animals and machines, and emerged in the early to mid-20th century. It is a philosophy and science that challenges boundaries and gives legitimate consideration to questions such as, is a blind man's cane a part of him? And is it possible to download the human consciousness to a non-human receptacle? The idea here that cybernetics proposes and that cyberpunks agree with is that humans are not just machines, or biological organisms with mechanical parts like wedges for teeth, levers for arms, and pulleys for legs. However, beyond this, the two differ in attitudes. Unlike cyberpunk culture, cybernetics places very little value on the body. This is because proponents of cybernetics argue that humans are, most importantly, defined by information, such as our memories. And according to cybernetic thought, if it is true that humans are defined by sets of data like memory, then it must also be true that the human mind can be uploaded into a machine or other body without any real loss of identity or consciousness. And we can see examples of such cybernetic thought in movies like Tron, The Matrix, and Avatar. Cyberpunks agree with the cybernetic perception that we live in a world where the boundaries between virtual reality and physical reality are blurred. But cyberpunks also want to retain what it means to be human, and much of cyberpunk art revolves around these very questions of identity and placement. A common plot in cyberpunk fiction, then, involves a misfit who fights against the proverbial machine, that is, some unfeeling, mechanized entity such as government or corporations. Cyberpunks also ask questions about machine and robo ethics, that is, what responsibilities do humans have towards the machines, and what responsibilities do the machines have towards their creators. The point is that cyberpunk marries several STEM and humanities inquiries together, including those of technology, style, politics, and ethics, and all this is to maintain that each side of experience is central to the human identity, creating another example of a one culture. As we wrap up this semester, I'd like to return to this question of whether we choose to be two cultures, develop a third, or become one. The question itself reminds us that there are no simple answers. In fact, the cultural texts and histories we've examined this semester teach us that there are often no single right or correct perspectives. And in the end, armed with the history, philosophy, and ethical concerns of this interdisciplinary discussion, my hope is that we can at the least each appreciate that there are multiple solutions we can participate in as we continue to contemplate how the sciences and humanities, art and technology, and humans and machines shape each other in our individual fields and day-to-day experiences.